Yo, what's up, everybody? I am going to eat something real quick. I'm gonna throw this video up because I want to see what he says. But as soon as I get done eating, then I will start up the gameplay. Okay? I got real hungry real quick for some reason.
Well, you guys know how it is. You can't have one GPU launch without another GPU launch right after it. Jay's out of the office today, but he didn't want to feel left out with this launch, so he went ahead and vomited all of his thoughts into my email inbox. So I get to present that to you guys today, along with what's new with AMD. So let's check it out.
We interrupt this video to bring you a special message from iFixit. No, we interrupt this interruption with this interruption about new stuff from iFixit. Wish you had a new graphics card, but inventory sucks? Fix the inventory problems with iFixit. Whoa, don't drop it. Can't fix that with iFixit. Just kidding, yes you can. Wish you could take iFixit with you anywhere, but your pockets aren't big enough? Introducing the new More.
And the new Minnow.
Take them with you anywhere. So get iFixit for your loved ones, or just get them for yourself.
Okay, so the important stuff. AMD's launching their Radeon RX 7600 XT 16GB GPU. It'll be out on January 24th with an MSRP of $329. So let's see how it stacks up to the RX 7600 that it's complementing. As far as specs are
I hope
concerned, it's got
everybody's doing
16
well
gigabytes
tonight,
of
this
VRAM this time
morning,
around
this
instead of
evening,
8
wherever y'all are
on
in the
the
world.
7600. It's got the same amount of compute units, ray accelerators, AI accelerators, and stream processors as the RX 7600.
I'm gonna eat real quick.
However,
Okay?
the 7600 XT has a
I'll still be able to
220
type and chat
megahertz
and
game
all that
clock
stuff, but I'm gonna kill
uplift
my webcam
and a
'cause I don't
100
like people
megahertz
watching me
boost
eat.
clock uplift. So that's where they're getting the extra
But
performance.
I'll be back in
there.
just a
They're
couple
clocking
minutes.
it's the same amount of cores, but they're clocking it higher.
What?
And the last meaningful change is probably the TDP. It's up to 190 watts now instead of 165 as we see on the 7600. Besides that, everything's pretty much the same as the 7600. It's got 18 gigabits a second memory speed, it's got 128-bit memory bus, and 32 megabytes of AMD Infinity Cache. So since I pretty much agreed with everything Jay sent me, let's get into his 2 cents. Jay says, it's nice to see more entry-level cards receiving higher amounts of VRAM. Despite the limiting factor being the horsepower, not really the VRAM, everyone's been demanding more VRAM, and now both GPU companies are delivering. I don't like that they're using 16 gigabytes to claim future ready, and yes, I agree with Jay here. There is no such thing as truly future ready or future proof. The stream processors will be the ultimate limiting factor in future titles, not really the VRAM. Okay, so in these other benchmarks that AMD showed in their press deck, I thought it was a little interesting because they're comparing it against the 4060 now instead of the 2060. I think this is a comparison between their feature suites, AMD versus NVIDIA, because on the RTX 4060, there are benchmarks in which they enable DLSS 3 and DLSS 3's frame gen. And that's probably because AMD is now launching AMD Fluid Motion Frames, or AFMF, or their version of frame gen, basically. I'll talk about this a little later, but the interesting thing about AFMF is that it's on a driver level and will apply to any DirectX 11 or 12 game. And that goes for RX 6000 series and up owners, not just the 7600 XT or the 7000 series, which is kind of crazy. Anyway, going back to these benchmarks, AMD's software and feature suite is called HyperRX, and that's basically just a one-stop, like, single-click, enable all the AMD performance-enhancing stuff that they have. So HyperRX is automatically going to enable FSR in the game if it supports it. If it doesn't support it, it will enable RSR, which is a driver-level FSR, and lower your resolution 1 tick, equivalent of FSR quality, basically. And then it'll enable anti-lag, as well as Radeon Boost in games that support Radeon Boost. Radeon Boost is kind of interesting because it's a motion-based dynamic resolution system. So when you move the mouse, crazy crap is happening on screen, the resolution drops during those frames because usually they're more demanding, and also during quick motion, you're not really paying attention to all the fine details because a bunch of crap is going crazy on the screen. So earlier I was talking about how AMD Fluid Motion Frames is enableable across any DirectX 11 or 12 title, which means you're adding frame gen to games that don't support it. So that's why you see in Baldur's Gate 3 and Assassin's Creed Mirage and The Last of Us, the 4060 does not support DLSS 3 frame gen in any of these titles. However, since you can enable AMD fluid motion frames across the driver, they go ahead and show you the performance uplift you get from here. This is their 1440p benchmark chart. Same thing, they've enabled as many features as they can based on the game support. In fact, if you look here at Like a Dragon Gaiden, the man who erased his name, they even ran FSR and AFMF on the NVIDIA card to give it 150 FPS, up from its native performance of 67 FPS. Now, Jay says it's a little weird because HyperRX does have some special sauce for when you pair an AMD GPU with an AMD CPU. He says he would have liked to have seen the tests with also an Intel or non-AMD CPU, basically, to see if there's that much of a difference between the special stuff that HyperRX gives you when you pair an AMD GPU and an AMD CPU. So let's start wrapping this up with pricing. Again, it's $329 MSRP, and the 7600 does not change. It's going to be starting at $269 like it always is. Jay chimed in with some thoughts about the pricing. He says that it would have been nice to have seen a price drop on the 7600, maybe down to $250 and then slide the XT in above it at $300. This would have been a more aggressive move that could have undermined NVIDIA a little. However, the $329 price point does make it more expensive than the still available 3060 and more expensive than the 4060 as well. Jay goes on to say, this will be an exciting time for the $300 to $350 price shopping consumer, but also a bit of a confusing one because both cards, the 4060 that they're comparing it to and the 7600 XT, have different AI and feature suites and all that sort of stuff that you definitely need to enable to get the maximum performance out of either of these cards. Since both cards rely so heavily on their AI and feature sets and all that sort of stuff to get their high frame rates, they might be different, very different end user experiences, even though you might have a card that's getting more FPS than the other one. I personally think that AFMF being a driver level feature on AMD where you can enable it on any game, you don't really have to wait for the developers to implement FrameGen, is an ace up AMD's sleeve. Especially with how much NVIDIA is touting FrameGen these days. The fact that AMD was basically just like, okay, fine, here, FrameGen everything, whatever, you can have fun. I think that's pretty crazy. But what do you guys think of the RX 7600 XT? If you're in the $300 to $350 price range, are you going to be shopping AMD, NVIDIA? Are you just going to be waiting and seeing? Maybe Intel to see if they come up with anything new? Sound off down in the comments below. And as always, we will see you guys in the next one.
All right, we're gonna do a special video for the Marine Corps birthday. We're gonna go over some of my favorite Marine quotes, some of my favorite Marine lore. It's gonna be great. And for those of you that don't know, the Marine Corps birthday is the greatest American holiday that most people don't know about. And once you do know about it, it becomes the groundhog for the entire holiday season. As soon as all your Marine buddies start posting memes talking about Semper Fi and how drunk they're gonna get at the ball, you know that the rest of the holiday season is upon you. It's only a matter of time until you get to start reading newspaper articles about how somebody got trampled to death for a $1 toaster on Black Friday. And then we all come together on Thanksgiving to do something that Americans very seldom do, overeat. And then December starts, that wonderful, wonderful time of year where every single store in America plays Mariah Carey.
I'm here,
All I
everybody.
Want
I'm
for
just eating
Christmas
real
Is
quick,
You
okay?
on a loop. And let me tell you, it will never ever get old or annoying or redundant or annoying. I blame Nick Cannon. Anyways, then we're going to have Christmas, then we're going to have New Year's, and then we all get to get the date wrong every time we write it down for the next 3 months while we quietly reflect on how many years it's been since we graduated from high school. What I'm trying to tell you is you owe it to yourself to go drinking with the Marines on the Marine Corps birthday before this shit show of a holiday season starts. Because if you've never been, drinking with the Marines is a phenomenal experience. Really, it's a two-step process. Step 1, show up. Step 2, proceed to do whatever the fuck you want. Because guess what? If anything goes down, you've got a horde of Marines. Who's gonna stop you? I'll tell you who's
That's
not gonna stop
definitely
you,
true.
the cops. Because when they show up, one of them is a Marine. And they're not
That's
about to
definitely
arrest
true,
a
too.
Marine or a Marine's buddy on the Marine Corps birthday. At worst, he's gonna tell you to have a good rest of your night. At best, he's there to help you hide the body, because that's just how Marines get down. So if you've never been drinking with the Marines, please do it. And I know what you're thinking. What if I don't have any Marine friends? That's fine. Just go to the bar. They'll be there. How are you going to identify said Marines? You don't have to. Believe me, you're going to figure it out pretty quick. They'll tell you. I love them, but they are the
Yes.
CrossFit
Yes,
of the
we
military
will.
branches. They are not about to let you think that they served in any other branch but the United States Marine Corps. Now, why is the Marine Corps birthday such a big deal?
I'm kind of a big deal.
Well, it's because the Marines are kind of a big deal. I don't know where to start with this, so we're just going to start from the beginning. November 10th, 1775. Yeah, that's before 1776. The Marine Corps is older than the United States of America. They were founded in Tun Tavern, a bar. The Marine Corps was founded in a bar. You can't make that up. Just setting a tone right out of the gate. Speaking of setting a tone, pretty much every time the Marine Corps gets let off its leash, they come back with some new terrifying nickname that the enemy gave them. And that proud tradition started in World War I at the Battle of Belleau Wood. If you don't know, super short, oversimplified version of history, the Germans were marching through France towards Paris. The Marine Corps shows up and is like, nah. They're able to push back the Germans once with the help of the army and the French, and then the French begged the Marines to retreat back to a more fortified position with them. To which the Marine Corps leadership responds, and I quote, "Retreat. We just got here." They then proceed to don their gas mask and fix their bayonets as they go into one of the bloodiest battles America has ever fought. And the Marines do it so aggressively that the Germans begin to call them the Devil Dogs, a moniker that no one that has ever fought them since has disagreed with. Then we fast forward to World War II. World War II, everybody talks about Iwo Jima, and they should. Very poetic, very heroic,
Give me just
very
a couple more
romantic when
minutes,
they
y'all.
raise the
I'm just
flag.
eating
But my
something
personal
real quick
favorite
before I
Marine
get
story from World
to
War
my
II
end.
is the Battle of Tarawa. If you don't know, Tarawa Atoll is the most fortified island the Marines have ever landed on. The Japanese admiral in charge of defending Tarawa is quoted as saying, "1 million men couldn't take Tarawa in 100 years." To which the Marine Corps said, "Hold my beer," as 4,000 Marines proceeded to take it in 3 days. Yeah. Only one Japanese officer actually survived that battle, and in his journal, he described it as this: "We could see the American landing crafts coming towards us like dozens of spiders on the surface of the water, when one of my men exclaimed, 'The gods of death have come.'" I'm trying to paint the picture that they've built quite the reputation for themselves. A reputation so intimidating that during the Gulf War, Desert Storm, whatever you prefer to call it, the Iraq military was scared of the Marines because they actually believed that to become an American Marine, you had to murder a member of your family at basic training. Now, that obviously is not true by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it speaks volumes that an entire military actually believed it. The Marine Corps merely existing is a form of psychological warfare. And that's just when they're merely existing. They're way scarier when they're actually doing their job. Like for everybody, including their own chain of command. For example, during the Battle of Fallujah, the Marines got so many headshots that the United States military had to launch an internal investigation because they were concerned that the Marines may have been executing people at point blank. They weren't. They were just out there giving long-range lobotomies at a rate that the American government didn't know was possible, which adds even more to the psychological warfare aspect. I mean, how would you feel if you had to go up against a military force that you knew was under investigation for getting too many headshots? I'm gonna go out on a limb and say not great. And that is truly intimidation at its finest, because everybody knows the most advanced militaries in the world offer their men body armor. Ain't nobody giving their guys face armor. The Marines subtly saying, I don't care how big your military budget is, you can still get it. I think Eleanor Roosevelt said it best when she said, and I quote, the Marines I have seen around the world have the cleanest bodies and the filthiest minds, the highest morale and the lowest morals of any group of animals I have ever seen. Thank God for the United States Marine Corps. End quote. And while I wasn't there, I'm willing to bet of the Marines that heard it, at least one of them leaned over to his buddy and said, I'd hit that. In conclusion, the point I'm trying to make to you is Marines make great friends and horrible enemies, and I would strongly recommend helping them celebrate their birthday. So yeah, go check out my website, buy some merch, quack bang out. I'm gonna go drink with the Marines. Okay, bye. This is hands down gonna be the longest video I've ever made. I should probably pee first. Hold on.
Yo, Sparkus, what's up? I'm just eating
Today we're talking
some
about
food real
America's
quick.
airborne
I'll
anti-hero.
be
Ladies
back
and
in
gentlemen,
just a couple
James
minutes, I
Albert
promise.
McNeese, aka Jake McNasty, the leader of one of the most notorious military groups of all time, the Filthy 13. And just to clarify, in case you don't know, being an anti-hero is not a bad thing, despite how it may sound. You see, the textbook definition of an anti-hero is a hero that does not display typical heroic qualities, which honestly is pretty ambiguous, but it's one of those things where you know it when you see it. So for example, a regular hero would be somebody like Superman. He's invincible, he shoots lasers from his eyes, and he always does the right thing 100% of the time. He never roughs up the bad guy. He always takes him straight to jail because the justice system never messes up anything. He only has sex in the missionary position. He always changes the batteries in his smoke detectors on time. It's boring, unrelatable, and completely inhuman behavior. Anyways, and then you have the anti-heroes, the fan favorites, the characters with human faults that they not only overcome, but turn into their advantage. Characters like Wolverine with his bad attitude, Deadpool with his morbid sense of humor. Hell, even Batman is an anti-hero because at the end of the day, it's more relatable to do karate in your garage, dress up like a bat, and then run around town beating up clowns and dudes on steroids than it is to be perfect.
Yup!
So I guess what it means to be an anti-hero is that you always do the right thing, but you don't always do it the right way. And if you were to ask me for a real-life example of an anti-hero, I can't give you a better one than Jake McNeese. All right, here's the deal. Jake was born in Oklahoma in 1919. He grew up during the Great Depression as one of trapped just to help put food on his family's table so they could survive. He had his first full-time job when he was 10 years old and continued to work full-time all the way through high school. After graduating, he became a full-time firefighter. Shortly after that, the attack on Pearl Harbor happened. America entered World War II. Jake, however, was exempt from the draft because he was a firefighter, but that's not what Jake wanted. Jake wanted to volunteer, and he didn't just want to volunteer for anything. Jake wanted to be a paratrooper and a demolition man. Jake wanted to jump out of a perfectly good plane behind enemy lines with a couple of buddies, be completely surrounded, and have nothing more than a gun and some explosives and just go out there and deprive the enemy of nice things. Got a bridge? Guess what? Now you don't. Nice power lines. It'd be a shame if somebody blew those up. That's what Jake wanted to do, and that's what he was gonna do. So at the age of 22, Jake set off for training. Upon arriving at training, Jake pretty much immediately establishes himself at being incredible at any task the Army can throw at him, but also a humongous pain in the ass to his entire chain of command. During his very first week in the Army, Jake got in a fist fight with the staff sergeant in charge of the chow hall because the staff sergeant wouldn't give him butter with his bread. At which point, the entire chain of command is like, on one hand, we have to get rid of this guy. He's a loose cannon. You absolutely cannot be attacking staff sergeants as a private. He's got to go. But on the other hand, this is exactly the type of behavior we're looking for somebody that we want to drop behind enemy lines and expect to fuck up everything. So they just kind of let it slide. Fast forward a couple of weeks, Jake is doing a demolition course and he ends up setting the course record. He is the fastest person to ever complete this course. At which point his leadership walks up and is like, "Hey, soldier, congratulations, you broke the record." Jake looks the guy in the eye and goes, "Yeah, if you think that's impressive, you should see what I can do when I have some butter once in a while." And that pretty much sets the tone for the rest of Jake's training. He absolutely crushes any task they give him, but also, Jake does not give a single fuck about the dog and pony show that is the US military. He's not going to call an officer sir or ma'am. He's going to call them by their nickname. He's not going to salute them unless they salute him first. He's not going to stand outside and salute the flag during retreat, and he absolutely is not going to show up to formation on time, and he's definitely not going to be sober all the time, because that's just how Jake is. And because of this, Jake would be the only new recruit to not get promoted to PFC, which is a way bigger deal than it sounds like, because at this point in time, in the 101st Airborne and the 82nd Airborne, every single new recruit after 31 days of training got promoted to private first class. The reasoning behind that was they wanted to give these guys a promotion so they could make more money and ideally send that money back home to their families because, well, they've got a very dangerous job coming up and nobody knows what's going to happen. So absolutely everybody is getting promoted to PFC after 31 days except for Jake. But here's the thing, Jake didn't really care. Jake wasn't there for the money. He was there for one thing and one thing only.
We're going to be doing one thing and one thing only, killing Nazis.
So Jake is now the lowest ranking person in his entire company, and leadership was hoping that Jake would take this as a sign that he should start cooperating and get it together. That doesn't really happen though, and leadership now has no idea what to do with Jake, because on one hand, he's way too valuable to lose, but on the other hand, they don't want him mingling with all the other soldiers, rubbing off on them in a bad way. So they take Jake, they stick him in his very own platoon, all by himself, and make him his own acting platoon sergeant. And then as time passes, whenever they get another soldier just like Jake, they would send him over to join Jake's platoon, and he would eventually get 4 members in his platoon, counting him for a total of 5, and they would become known as the Dirty Five. And from there, things would obviously get really out of hand. Fast forward, Jake and his men finish the first phase of their training, and they are given a pass to go out on the town one last time before they have to go to Fort Benning for airborne school. So Jake and his men, his men that all outrank him because he's still technically a private, but he's also somehow their platoon sergeant, they all go out, they go to the bar, they get drunk. They end up running into some MPs. One of his men starts lipping off to the MPs. The MP goes to beat him with a nightstick. Jake interferes and says, hey, he's really drunk, let it slide. In Jake's own words, and I quote, he's so drunk he couldn't hit the floor with his hat in 30 throws. Okay, so just let it slide. He's going to get his men back to the barracks. It's going to be fine. The military police, the MP, then tells Jake, mind his own business, as he turns around to hit Jake's guy with a nightstick, at which point Jake proceeds to beat the shit out of 2 MPs, taking their Colt 45 1911s, firing all the ammunition into a nearby street sign before handing them back their empty guns and saying, okay, now you can take me to jail. The next morning, Jake's commanding officer shows up to the stockade to talk to Jake, and he's like, look, not surprised you're here, don't really care what happened. Here's the deal. The Japanese have the world record for the longest ruck march, and I want to break that record by having a group of guys march from here all the way to Fort Benning, 136 miles, and I think you and your men are some of the guys that are going to be able to pull it off. Are you in? At which point McNeese is like, 136 miles isn't a problem at all. I won't change my socks, and I won't even get a blister, which, if you've never been in the military and you've never ruck marched, saying that you're not going to change your socks or get a blister on a 136 mile fucking ruck march is an unprecedented amount of shit talking. It's like a NASCAR driver saying that he's going to win the Daytona 500 without having his tires changed a single time. It's like going out drinking, ending up at Taco Bell at 2 in the morning, eating a bunch of steak quesadillas, waking up the next day, taking a shit, and not wiping, okay? It's not possible. So then the commanding officer is like, great, cool, I'll see you at the ruck march. We're going to go ahead and leave you in the stockade for the next 10 days. Until then, though, Jake's like, cool, no problem, I'll hang out. 10 days later shows up. Jake is in a prison uniform with a giant P on the front, and 3 MPs show up with 12-gauge shotguns loaded, and they escort Jake to the starting line of this fucking ruck march like he's Hannibal Lecter. There, he changes into a normal uniform and takes off on a 136-mile ruck march to Fort Benning so he can go to airborne school. And sure enough, true to his word, Jake is one of only 75 men to finish this ruck march, and he did not change his socks, and he did not get a single blister, which I cannot stress to you enough is a superhuman feat. So Jake and his men go on to do airborne training, absolutely no problem, nothing really of note happens here except for the fact that Jake is still a private and has still not been promoted in any way. After completing airborne training, Jake and his men are going to go to Camp McCall, North Carolina, where they are to receive expert saboteur training. They'll be receiving extra training in demolitions, they'll be receiving training in how to drive tanks, how to drive bulldozers, how to drive excavators, how to drive trains, pretty much anything and everything they could teach these guys to be able to wreak havoc on enemy infrastructure is what they're learning in Camp McCall, North Carolina. Jake and his men continue to do what they do. They wreck every task that they're given. It goes perfect. Jake and his men are now about to go to
Hold on 1 minute, y'all. I'll be right back.
One last pass to go out on the town one last time before they ship off. So Jake and his men go out drinking. Somehow or another, they end up at this little tiny diner neighboring a train yard, at which point one of the trains pulls up, stops, walks across all the other tracks, and the conductors go in and they start eating at this diner. Jake is super drunk and he's like, I don't want to walk back to the base. I'm stealing that train. And that's exactly what he does because the army just taught him how to drive trains. So Jake proceeds to steal a train and drive it all the way back to just outside of Camp McCall, where he abandons the train, goes in, and goes to bed. But everybody knows Jake did it. Nobody's turning him in, so Jake gets away with it again, and now Jake and his men are off to England. So Jake and his men arrive in England. At this point, Jake has 13 men in his platoon, including himself, and they all come to the same exact conclusion: English food fucking sucks, which is on par with every opinion of it I've ever heard, which seems weird to me because it's a country that took over most of the known world for the sake of trading spices, and apparently nobody came to the conclusion that, hey, maybe you should put some on the food. But whatever. Because the food sucks, Jake decides, hey, I'm a master at hunting and fishing and all this other stuff. I'm just gonna kill enough animals to feed my entire platoon by myself. And that's exactly what he does. The only difference is he has military grade equipment to do it. Jake is going out in the woods at night with a spotlight and an M1 Grand, and as soon as a set of eyes looks at him, it's getting blown to smithereens. Jake has his men going out fishing with explosives, okay? They are eating everything. Couple of problems with that. One, there's strict water rationing going on. The soldiers are only allowed to have 1 shower a week, is how little water they have to spare. So all 13 of his men come together and they decide, hey, we're just not going to take showers and we're going to use all of our water rations to clean and cook all of this game that we're killing. And because now they started stinking, they would all become known as the Filthy 13. The other problem with that was apparently all of the game was technically the property of the king, and the only people that were allowed to hunt it were the lords and ladies of the land, which definitely was not Jake McNeese and the Filthy 13. So Sir Ernest Wells ends up figuring out what Jake's been doing. He gets super pissed, ends up suing the government for like $10,000 for all the animals that Jake and the Filthy 13 ate. The entire unit gets in a bunch of trouble, and Jake's kind of just like, meh. I mean, what are you gonna do? I was hungry, so I ate some food. What do you want from me? If I'm in trouble, go ahead and punish me. What are you gonna do? Stick me in an airplane, make me jump out into enemy-held territory where a bunch of Germans are gonna try to kill me? Joke's on you, I'm into that shit. And the entire military is just kind of like, we literally have no way to punish him. So he gets away with it yet again. Fast forward June 5th, 1944. The day before D-Day, Jake and the Filthy 13 are given a separate and extremely dangerous mission of going out, capturing and occupying an enemy-held bridge that's supposed to be able to help Allied tanks penetrate further inland. After a day, they'll be reinforced from troops landing on Utah Beach. And if Jake can't capture and occupy the bridge, he is to blow it up so that the enemy can't use it for reinforcements. This mission is deemed extremely dangerous and borderline impossible, but leadership figures if anybody can pull it off, it's going to be Jake and the Filthy 13, because let's face it, the entire command structure at this point in time is basically looking at Jake's platoon like a fragmentation grenade of fuckery and bad attitude that they finally get to yeet at the enemy. So after receiving their mission, Jake and his men go out to start boarding the C-47s to take off at midnight to jump into Normandy. At which point, Jake decides that he's going to whip out his straight razor and shave himself a mohawk. He tells everybody that he's part Choctaw Native American and he wants to honor that heritage. However, in reality, while he was part Choctaw, he had heard that Germany had a lice epidemic and wanted to go there with as little hair as possible. Regardless, his men followed suit and all shaved mohawks. They then began donning black face paint, at which point Jake is like, this is cool, but we can make it cooler. So he goes over to the C-47 that had a fresh white stripe painted down the side of it to identify friend from foe, and the paint was still wet. So he runs his fingers through the paint and goes around painting all of his men's face with white face paint as well. Unbeknownst to Jake and the Filthy 13, there were camera crews there taking pictures and recording them, and they would actually end up going viral, and the entire nation would be captivated by the unique and dangerous look of these men as they prepared to jump into enemy-held territory. So much so that it would actually inspire a movie to be made known as The Dirty Dozen, and Jake and his men would be none the wiser to any of it until after World War II. June 6, 1944, Jake, the Filthy 13, and 18,000 other paratroopers take off in C-47s as they prepare to jump behind enemy lines before the amphibious invasion at D-Day. About 20 miles from the targeted drop zone, Jake's plane gets hit with enemy flak fire and is losing altitude, and they have to bail out early. Moments after McNeese jumps out of the plane, the entire plane explodes, killing some of the Filthy 13 and scattering the rest miles apart. So Jake lands, he's completely unharmed, and he has all of his equipment. The only problem is he doesn't have any other Americans anywhere near him. So he just kind of takes off, he gets in a couple of long-range firefights with the Germans, takes a couple of them out in close quarters combat, and he's just going around trying to find any other paratroopers to group up with. And it's going on for hours and hours, and he can't find anybody. And he's starting to think maybe the whole thing was a catastrophe. Maybe it got called off. Maybe I'm the only guy out here right now. What am I gonna do? And he finally comes across one other American paratrooper, and it's a machine gunner that lost track of his machine gun during the jump, and this guy is running around Normandy with nothing but a belt of machine gun ammunition and no gun. And Jake is like, Jesus, okay, well, you're with me now, I guess. Here's my grenades, you take those, I'm gonna keep my M1 Grand. Follow me. So now Jake and grenade guys set off to find more paratroopers. So they keep looking, they find some more. They find a squad of mortar guys. They find some guys over here, some guys over here. Slowly, Jake amasses an entire platoon of about 35 paratroopers, and they're all gonna help Jake in his mission to take out this bridge. So Jake and his new companions start making their way to go blow up this bridge, at which point they would eventually come up on an entire American unit being led by this colonel, and the colonel is like, hey, you're working for me now. I don't care about that bridge. I need you to go pull security over on this part over here. McNeese tried arguing with the colonel, but the colonel wasn't having it. He gave a direct order, and McNeese is like, okay, fine, whatever. I'll take my 35 guys, and we'll go guard this for you. So they take off headed there. They get to the point they're supposed to guard, and McNeese just keeps walking because it was the same direction as the bridge. All of his men are like, hey, we're supposed to stop here. McNeese is like, you do what you want. I have to go take care of this bridge. You can come with me. I'd appreciate it. If not, stay here and guard it. I really don't care. All of the men go with Jake and proceed to make their way to this bridge. So Jake and his men show up to the bridge, they capture it, they build up some fortified fighting positions because they now have to hold it for a day until reinforcements from Utah Beach can arrive. So the Germans start showing up, they fight the Germans back every time. 1 day passes, no reinforcements. Day 2, they keep fighting the Germans back, holding the bridge, no reinforcements show up. Day 3, the Germans are now on the other end of the bridge with Jake and his men over here, and it is just no man's land in between on the actual bridge. When suddenly, an entire squadron of P-51 Mustangs comes up and blows up the entire bridge, because apparently the American leadership determined there's no way Jake was going to be successful in his mission, so they blew up the bridge anyways. Thankfully, Jake and his men would make it out okay. None of them were harmed in the blast from the P-51. Now, at this point, Jake decides, hey, we're going to continue to hold our position here, because if anybody is going to try to cross this ravine, they're going to do it right here where the bridge used to be. And sure enough, an entire German infantry battalion shows up on the other side of where this bridge was. At this point, the German officers make their way through the ravine and up to Jake under a white flag where they're like, hey, go ahead and surrender. We've got 700 men. You've got 35. It's going to be a bloodbath. Just call it a day. Jake, being Jake, is like, no, but you're welcome to surrender to me. The German officer, thoroughly annoyed, is like, what are you doing in that mohawked head of yours? I have 700 men. You need to surrender or I'm going to kill all of you. At which point, I'm paraphrasing here, but I would assume Jake said something along the lines of, yeah, you've got 700 men, but you're going that way and the battlefield is that way, which tells me that all my buddies showed up on Utah Beach and they've been kicking your ass so bad that now you're trying to run away from them. So, the way I figure it, you've got about 3 options. Option A, you surrender to me right here, right now, and you all live happily ever after. Option B, you go back to your men, you hold your position right where you're at, and all my buddies show up in a little bit with a bunch of Sherman tanks and proceed to un-German engineer all of you motherfuckers. And option C, you guys try to fight your way through this ravine with me guarding it, which to be honest, I would recommend the least. I have the high ground, I have fortified machine gun positions, and you've got to make your way through a ravine first, meaning that I basically also have a moat. So, I will effectively be going medieval on your ass if you choose option C. Now, I'm not trying to tell you how to do your job, but if I was you, I would pick option A, because if you pick option B or option C, I can pretty much guarantee that the next piece of officer correspondence that you're going to get is going to be from a fucking Ouija board. At this point, the German officer storms off with his hair on fire. He's absolutely pissed. Jake then goes over to his men and he's like, hey, get ready for a fight. I'm pretty sure I just poked the bear. We'll see what happens. Sure enough, like an hour later, 700 German infantrymen proceed to take off and attempt to bum rush Jake and his men in their fortified fighting positions. Now, I don't know what you know about military tactics, but generally speaking, it is a terrible idea to run face first into machine gun fire. It's also a terrible idea to try to fight the enemy when they have the high ground. If you don't believe me, ask Anakin. But running face first into a fortified machine gun position through a moat while they have the high ground, and the men running the machine guns are under the command of some American with a mohawk, Native American face paint, who everybody calls Jake McNasty, is literally a lifetime supply worth of shitty ideas. Jake and his men would hold their fire until the majority of the Germans made their way into the water, at which point they would open fire with 4 heavy crew-served machine guns, 2 mortar tubes, and a bunch of small arms, effectively mowing down and decimating the entire German battalion. On that day, Jake and his ragtag group of paratroopers were credited with removing 700 enemy combatants from the field. Shortly after that, the reinforcements from Utah Beach show up. Jake goes over to a small town. They get put in a holding position for a little while. Then Jake's small group of ragtag paratroopers all get evac'd, where they get broken up and sent back to their original units, where they get regrouped and refitted to return to war. Jake McNeese would find himself getting evac'd all the way back to France, where he would be reunited with the 5 surviving members of the Filthy 13, as well as receiving a bunch of new recruits for his platoon. At this point, they had a couple weeks off where they could drink, relax, do whatever. Jake's going out, he's getting drunk, he's having a good time. Then he would receive word that his platoon was going to be partaking in a new airborne operation referred to as Operation Market Garden, the largest airborne operation in human history, with 38,000 paratroopers jumping into Nazi-occupied Holland. Hearing that he was going to be jumping into Holland, Jake figured that he was going to be engaging in a lot of close quarters combat, so he opted to turn in his M1 Garand and get a Thompson, which is exactly what he did. He then received word that his platoon, being the bridge experts that they are, were going to have to go out, capture a bunch of bridges, defend them, and or get rid of them until they heard word otherwise.
Hey, look, I made a bridge. It only took me like, what, 10 seconds?
And pretty much everything goes according to plan there. They jump in, they get to the bridge, they take the bridge over, they hold it for a couple of weeks, then they receive word that they are to go help another unit take over this town known as Eindhoven. So Jake and his men make their way over to Eindhoven, and they begin helping to clear out this town, room by room, building by building, close quarters combat, them versus the Germans. In his book, Jake described this close quarter combat as very different from what you see today. It wasn't 4 troops stacked up outside a door, kicking it in, and all running in together. It was one guy, one room. An American would kick open the door, throw in a frag grenade. As soon as the frag grenade blew up, the American would then crawl in on his hands and knees with a Thompson submachine gun and shoot anybody that survived. The reason they crawled in on their hands and knees is because, according to Jake, the grenade would kick up so much dust and soot and debris in these old buildings that you couldn't see standing at normal level. So you had to drop down like you were in a fire trying to avoid carbon monoxide to be able to see what you were doing. And this is how they cleared the entire village. Making their way all the way through it, about halfway through, Jake would be clearing a building where somebody clearly used to make furniture. At which point, Jake would find a chicken. Now, this chicken had 6 eggs. Finding eggs in the middle of a war zone in World War II was a big deal. Nobody had eggs, and Jake fucking loves eggs, okay? This is amazing. Only problem, he's got to figure out how to get these 6 eggs all the way through this village without breaking them. So he thinks for himself to a second, maybe I could leave the eggs here and I'll come back for them later. And he's like, no, that's not going to work, because one of these other paratroopers is going to find my eggs, and these are my eggs, I want them. So he takes all the eggs and sticks them in the cargo pocket of his pants. And then, every time he clears a room, rather than crawling in on his arms and legs, he slides in on one side, the side without the eggs, to ensure that he doesn't damage any of his precious eggs, which is the most gangster shit I've ever heard in my entire life. This dude is going toe-to-toe in close quarters combat against enemies with submachine guns trying to kill him, and his primary concern is not fucking up breakfast. This is like a stupid video game achievement for when you want to play it on extra hardcore mode. It's almost like this man knows that he has plot armor. It's absolutely incredible. So he continues to go on, clears out the entire village,
Hello,
doesn't
everybody.
break a
How are
single
y'all
egg.
doing?
It's absolutely incredible. They get to the other side of the village. They're like, sweet, we cleared out all the Germans. And then across the field, out of the wood line, pulls an entire German mechanized unit with 10 tanks. At this point, Jake is like, I just want to eat my fucking eggs. This sucks. So Jake and the Filthy 13 go to work. Being the demolition men, it's their job to go around to the tanks and disable their tracks so they can no longer move. And then the infantry's going to come in with their flamethrowers and cook the enemy out. And that's
If y'all
exactly
like
what happens.
military
Everything goes according to
stories
plan.
and
They
stuff,
take out all 10 tanks.
this is
Not
the guy
really
that
big of a deal.
you wanna
Jake
follow.
reaches into his pocket. Tragedy strikes.
He does
He's broken
awesome.
single. It only took 10 German tanks to make this guy fumble enough to break a single egg, and he got to enjoy 5 eggs for dinner that night. Jake and his men would then adopt a holding position where they would chill out for a little bit, hold their position until they got evac'd again for yet another huge mission where Jake and his men would find themselves back in France for a second time. So Jake and his men find themselves at an army base right outside of Reims, France. Obviously, Jake and his men want to go drink in town, have a good time, see if they can find some women, you know, what have you. The only problem is, apparently the 82nd Airborne was there last month, and the 82nd Airborne caused such an issue in town that the military had to bring in a special group of MPs to get the 82nd Airborne under control, and now all paratroopers have been effectively banned from town. I mean, to be fair, that's pretty on brand for the 82nd Airborne. Bunch of rowdy dudes. If you don't know, that's their logo. On paper, AA stands for All American, but everybody knows that it actually stands for Athletic Alcoholics. Now, Jake, wanting to drink anyways, comes up with a plan. He's got to hook up with a distillery all the way over in Paris, which is like a 2-day trip away. So, Jake gets a 72-hour pass, starts leaving to go to Paris. His commanding officer stops him and is like, Jake, what are you doing? I'm going to Paris to get some booze for the boys. Jake, Paris is 2 days away. Do you really think that you're going to be able to take 2 days to travel to Paris, go on a week-long bender, and then travel 2 days back all in 72 hours? At which point, Jake looks at the officer and says, and I quote, I don't know. I wouldn't be willing to bet on it, but I'm willing to try. At which point, the officer kind of just rolls his eyes and is like, is there anything I can do to stop you? Jake, not really, so the officer just lets him go because he realizes that Jake's going no matter what. It's just a matter of if he wants to get his ass beat over it or not. So Jake makes his way to Paris, goes on a couple-day bender, gets a bunch of booze for the boys, heads back to base. He finally gets back. He's been AWOL for 5 days. They immediately throw him in the stockade for abandoning his post, at which point his command comes up to him and is like, Jake, we've been talking. We really want you to volunteer for Pathfinder School. At which point, Jake kind of has a little bit of a panic attack and he's like, they're trying to kill me. Like, they're actively trying to kill me. You see, if you don't know what a Pathfinder is, they're basically paratroopers, but they go out hours or a day before the big, huge paratrooper operation, and they jump beforehand, and then they figure out the best spots to drop all the other paratroopers and radio it back to base so they know where to put everybody. This job during World War II was incredibly dangerous. On a given airborne operation, it required 2 Pathfinders and 1 set of radio equipment to get the mission done. And on every mission, they would drop 10 Pathfinders and 2 sets of equipment because they knew that on average, 8 of them were going to die and 1 set of equipment was going to be damaged or lost. They had a 80% fatality rate on any one mission at any point during World War II. And that is why Jake thought for sure they're trying to get me killed. The only silver lining here is they can't make him do it, because Pathfinder is so dangerous that it was strictly a voluntary basis only. But Jake wasn't one to act too quick, so he said he'd think about it. And he goes and he thinks about it, and he's thinking about the war, and he starts to think to himself, you know, Pathfinder school's all the way over in England. By the time they send me there, I start school, I finish school, there's a good chance this war might be over altogether, and I'm not gonna have to make another combat jump. It'll be great. So he's like kind of on the fence about it now, and then he really starts thinking about it, and he's like, man, Pathfinder school's at an Air Force base, and even back in World War II, the Air Force had way better food than the Army. So now he might not have to do any more combat jumps, and he's gonna get some good food. And then it dawns on him. The Air Force base where they teach Pathfinder school is 8 miles down the road from Oxford University, and all the young British men are fighting a war right now, meaning that Oxford is just full of college chicks. And as Jake said himself, and I quote, this seemed like a mighty fine opportunity to do some postgraduate work. Fucking love this guy. So Jake shows up to Pathfinder school, and he's immediately called into the commander's office, which is weird because he hasn't even done anything wrong yet. Jake goes in there, the commander's like, hi Jake, I've heard all about you. I want you to be acting first sergeant. At which point Jake is like, I don't know what you heard about me, but you heard wrong. I'm technically not even a private first class yet. I've never been promoted. I am not the leader that you want. I don't care about saluting. I don't care about any of that dog and pony show military stuff. I'm here to fight a war, and that's it. At which point the commander's like, that's exactly why I want you. I don't need you to salute me. I don't need you to call me sir. I need you to get these guys ready for war, and I don't think there's anybody better to do it than you. I'll make sure that you end up getting paid as a first sergeant the entire time you're an acting first sergeant. To which Jake replies, I don't really care about the money. Look, I've blown up every safe between here and Normandy, I have plenty of money, okay? I might be willing to do this job, but if I'm gonna do it, there's gonna be some terms. Anybody that's fighting for me is gonna keep having good Air Force food, and they get permanent leave whenever they want it. At that point, the commander agrees. Jake is now the acting first sergeant, which, if you don't know, is the polar opposites of the spectrum as far as enlisted rank goes. So, per usual, Jake excels at pretty much everything all through Pathfinder school. They graduate, Jake is still acting first sergeant, and he gets to decide which person is in which platoon. So naturally, Jake does what anybody would do, and he builds a dream team of the 20 best Pathfinders out of all 400 and puts himself with that platoon. Now, at this point, it's really looking like Jake might never have to go out on a mission as a Pathfinder because the war is really dwindling down at this point. Then, December 16th, 1944, the Germans would launch a last-ditch effort counteroffensive to try to fight Allied forces. This would be known as the Battle of the Bulge, where they would cut off the 101st Airborne, Jake's old division, inside the town of Bastogne, completely surround them, and the 101st Airborne is now stuck in this city. They are running out of ammunition, they're running out of food, and they're running out of gas. And if they end up surrendering, it could turn the entire tide of World War II. So, all they need is they need somebody to be able to parachute in, get in town, and be able to call in resupply drops to let the 101st Airborne have a fighting chance to be able to hold off the Germans long enough for Patton to show up with his army of 350,000 men. So, you've got a crazy mission, somebody needs to save the day, you're calling upon Jake and his dream team. There hasn't been a single radio transmission to come out of the 101st Airborne in over 2 days. Despite that, Jake and his dream team are going to jump in anyways. They have to be able to hit a 2-mile diameter landing zone while jumping out of a plane that's traveling 160 miles an hour, utilizing parachutes that they can't steer. This mission is seemingly impossible, but here they go. They jump out of the planes, they hit the landing zone perfectly. One man, unfortunately, does die, but that is a 5% fatality rate compared to the average of 80. Jake and his men then immediately get to work setting up their equipment in opposite sides of town. And after one guy calls in one resupply, he picks up his stuff, moves to a different location. Then this guy calls in his resupply, picks up, moves to a different location, and they bounce the signal back and forth on opposite sides of town all day, sending signals for resupply. They do this because they know the Germans can triangulate their radio equipment and don't want them to start utilizing artillery to take them out. Within the first 24 hours of Jake and his men landing, they called in 247 C-47s for resupply drops. On the second day, they were able to call in 160. On the third day, they were able to call in 140. On the fourth day, they were able to call in 269. And on the fifth day, they were able to call in 129. Jake and his men have single-handedly provided the 101st Airborne Division with enough resupply to be able to stave off the Germans, to give Patton enough time to show up with his army and penetrate through the German flank, effectively ending World War II in the European theater and potentially saving the entire war as a whole. So Jake has effectively saved the day. It is now time to get out of there, get retooled, refitted, and probably never make another combat jump again because for sure the war is over this time, right? Wrong. Apparently Patton gets in some trouble, needs some hotshot Pathfinders to jump into Prim, Germany, and call in resupply for him. So they're going to Jake and his crew yet again. Jake jumps in, saves the day for a 4th time, becoming one of the only men in history to conduct 4 combat jumps during World War II. At that point, the war is basically over, and they adopt a holding position where they pretty much just party in Germany for the rest of the time. Now, as fate would have it, Jake and his men and some of the rest of the 101st Airborne would end up taking refuge in the abandoned castle of Hermann Göring, like one of the biggest Nazi leaders during World War II. And oddly enough, a bunch of the spoils from all the countries that Germany has invaded all found their way to his castle. Fancy booze, fancy wine, and apparently he was a racehorse fan because every famous racehorse from every country that Germany invaded had made its way back to his castle. So Jake, the Filthy 13, a bunch of other 101st guys are sitting there getting drunk on fancy wine, fancy whiskey, and there's like $100 million worth of racehorse sitting in the barn, at which point they're like, let's throw on a rodeo for all the townspeople, right? Right, and that's exactly what they do. So you've got a bunch of drunk paratroopers riding around all these fancy racehorses. It's a great time. And then my personal favorite part of this entire story, while out at the rodeo, Jake would meet an attractive young lady by the name of Amelia. And Jake and Amelia would immediately hit it off and start doing some postgraduate work. I mean dating. Oh, don't worry, it gets better. As it would turn out, Amelia's father is the leader of the local chapter of Hitler's Youth, which is just The absolute cherry on top to this entire story. How's the saying go? Screw you and the horse you rode in on. Jake's like, nah, I'm gonna raid your liquor cabinet, steal your horse, ride in on it, and then bang your daughter. This is the best possible ending to this man's epic saga in World War II that anybody could even come up with, and it happened in real life. Just to recap, Jake jumps into D-Day, wrecks house. Then jumps into Holland, wrecks house, and then eats some eggs about it. Then he pretty much single-handedly turned the tide of the Battle of the Bulge, and then he proceeds to find the closest thing he can to a Nazi princess and show her that inches are in fact better than centimeters. Shortly after that, Jake would get sent back home to America, where they would then reroute him to Arkansas so that he could see a plastic surgeon about getting his ear repaired because it had gotten mangled during one of his exploits. While in Arkansas, he would have a run-in with the military police, get in a fight with them, get thrown in the stockade yet again. Before being released, the military police commander would inform him after he gets his ears fixed, they don't ever want to see him on their post again, at which point Jake, being Jake, informs the military police commander, hey, if you ever see me again, I'm going to be a civilian and you're going to be the one with the fucking problem because I'm going to kick your ass. At which point, the military police commander files charges on Jake, and Jake is immediately chaptered out of the U.S. Army, officially ending his military career after only 3 years, 5 months, and 26 days. Because that's just how it goes for the anti-heroes. They're absolutely necessary in a time of war and not tolerated whatsoever during a time of peace. Jake didn't really mind though. He had accomplished what he set out to do. Plus, he had a huge hoard of cash that he had liberated from all the safes that he ran across in Europe. At that point in time, he goes on to explore his own alcoholism, going from place to place, town to town, job to job, just kind of doing his own thing. He ends up getting in a ton of bar fights, not because Jake instigates them, but because every local tough guy hears Jake's a paratrooper, and they want to prove how tough they are, but ultimately the only thing they proved is that they could fall down. Then, after a number of years, Jake would have a near miss with a drunk driving accident where he would almost drive his car into a concrete wall, in his own words, only missing it by a coat of paint. Because of that, Jake would decide that he needs to change his own ways. He would defeat his alcoholism, he would find God, he would start going to church every Sunday, he would find a wife, he would have some kids, and he would live happily ever after, working at the post office in his hometown of Ponca City, Oklahoma, selling stamps and slinging packages, and nobody was none the wiser that their friendly neighborhood mailman was one of, if not the greatest anti-hero of all time. So in conclusion, it's hard to put into words what an anti-hero is, but you know it when you see it. However, the best definition I have ever heard comes from Jake McNasty McNeese himself. When asked in an interview later in life how he managed to survive all of his crazy exploits, he said, and I quote, "I think I made it because God didn't have anywhere to put me." At that point in time, he was so busy, he was only putting people in one of two places, heaven or hell, and I think he knew that I would have goofed up either one of them. So here I am. And I think that might be the closest thing to a perfect definition that we're ever going to get when it comes to defining what an anti-hero is. So, thank you for watching. The best way to support the channel is to go buy some merch at thefatelectrician.com. Quack bang, out.
Well, I should retreat that evening, and then went in town that night and got on a big drunk. The MPs was really mistreating a soldier boy. I stepped in, told them to stop it, and they said, we'll do it anytime we want to. So I took their nightsticks away from them, beat them to the ground. And then I took their 45s off of them and shot up all the street lights and everything around there. And I wasn't shooting at any people, I was just shooting lights. And then we went on in with them to the stockade. And I never did have to stand retreat again.
All right, y'all. Let's get some game going. Oh, they got Bumblebee. Damn. And okay, oh, wait, let me see that. Thank you. Really? You're only gonna let me do one at a time. Okay. shit. God damn it. No, baby. You didn't have to get down. Damn it. Dude, did you just quit fucking playing or what? God damn it. God, I don't want to have to do this. Okay, I'm not stopping the stream, but I need to log out, clear my cache, and then log back in. I'm not turning the stream off, so please don't leave. I'll be back in just a couple of minutes, I promise. God, I ain't gonna do this shit. Y'all can see that I'm actually doing something. I'm not just saying I'm doing it. Good, good, good. Still here. Give me just a second. I gotta log back in there for damn thing. Bye-byes. Sorry, I'm having to clear my cache of everything because Twitch is being ignorant about not letting me do clips all of a sudden for some reason. is today? Wednesday. Okay. All right, y'all. Sorry about the little technical difficulty I was having. the fuck? Son of a bitch. Red, blue, and yellow. I bet you those slide good anyway. fuck. Fit in there. God damn, man. Queen of the Damned. That's it. What's up, chat? How's everybody doing? Ow. Shit. work makes the dream work.
I don't know why I think this is a good idea, but y'all tagged me on it, so let's do it. I was gonna say something like I have to find a pillowcase I could get in, but then I know y'all are gonna be like, you can fit in anything. You know what? Shut up. All I'm saying is if I fit in this, we're gonna have to have a conversation. Hey Kaylee,
she's
what do you
cute.
do during your weekdays? Oh, nothing. I just try to fit in a pillowcase. Why do you specialize in small things? I really need to stop before, like, the jokes go. Well, now I know I can fit in my pillowcase. Yeah, I'm done with the internet. I don't know why I think this is a good idea, but y'all tagged me on it, so let's do it. I was gonna say.
As the day comes to an end, it is now time for sleep. A nice, calm, refreshing sleep. To clear your mind. Imagine yourself showering, washing, to clear your mind. Your mind.
What the hell? I don't know what's going on with this. What in the hell? Error. Why am I getting an error? Okay, let me try this. So, little change of plans. My music doesn't want to play. So, I'm going to get off of YouTube and I'm just going to play some regular music. But I know I'll get dinged for having DMCA, but I don't know what else to do because it won't freaking work. Hold on, let me. I think they're having an issue because it keeps saying 404. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll just swap completely over to Twitch and just play some regular music. Give me just one second, y'all.